Shabbat Shalom. In today's parsha, Tavoo, the first item is Parshat Biכורים. The Torah describes how the person who has harvested the first fruits of the year, a ceremony in which these fruits are brought to Yerushalayim and presented in the Beit HaMikdash to the Kohen, to the priest. The Torah gives us sort of an outline, skeleton ceremony, specifying that the fruits be put in the basket, and telling us about handing the basket to the Kohen, and prostration and shlachavaya. But the main center point, the centerpiece of this whole ceremony, of this whole event, is the recitation. That the person bringing the Torah specifies word for word what the person should say as he presents these Biכורים to the Kohen. And the central theme of this narrative, which is our right, our divine right to Eretz Yisrael. It begins by saying, Higadati Hayom L'Hashem Elokecha Kivarti El Haaretz Asher Nishba Hashem Elokeinu Lotet Lanu. And Haaretz, the land of Israel, the Jewish homeland, is repeated there, mentioned there time and time again. Now I'm sure that you all know that Chazal chose to take part of this recitation, the Arami of Edavi, and incorporate it in the Haggadah. And this was explained by the Safrai, father and son, who put out this wonderful Haggadah Chazal, that the Haggadah was really not formulated, was not crystallized or canonized, if you wish, until after Churban Beit HaMikdash. And when Chazal decided to put together a sort of a text or booklet that will be said at the Pesach Seder, they thought it would be a good idea to include the Arami of Edavi, first of all, of course, because it contains the basic theme of our forefathers going down into Egypt and being liberated and coming out and taking possession of Eretz Yisrael, but also because they're biblical verses, and most people will be familiar with them. Don't forget that in ancient times, in medieval times maybe also, someone who was called an Am Haaretz was someone who knew Tanakh very, very well, but just didn't know anything beyond Tanakh. So Chazal, I think, wisely chose texts that would have been well known to people, whether or not they had a written Haggadah to consult. And for this reason, of course, a lot of people who speak about the Parshat Tavoo and Parshat Biכורים talk about analogies between, the recitation for Biכורים and the Haggadah Shel Pesach. But I want to talk about is what I think is an important difference. Because in Haggadah Shel Pesach, the commandment, the mitzvah, is Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim. But halachically speaking anyway, there is no fixed recitation. There is a bare minimum, which we say is part of the Haggadah. We have to say these three things: Pesach, Matzah, or Maror. And someone who, for whatever reason, doesn't have the time or the inclination to, talk at length about Yitziat Mitzrayim, mentioning Pesach, the Korban Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, and you've fulfilled the mitzvah. On the other hand, Chazal also say, and this is also in the Haggadah, that is to say, so there's a wide latitude, there's a bare minimum, there's an encouragement to speak as much as possible, and we talk about the people, those sages who, were talking about Yitziat Mitzrayim all night long, and most of us, do something more or less in the middle. But there is no fixed recitation, even though we have our printed Haggadot, and we say, what's become the sort of canonized text. Halachically speaking, there is no fixed recitation, but Biכורים, it's quite the opposite. Biכורים, the key part of the mitzvah is reciting precisely, word for word, exactly what the Torah tells us that the person who brings Bikurim should say. So much so that there were real halachic issues. For example, whether a ger, a convert, could recite the passage for Bikurim. There much that tells that there are people who bring Bikurim but can't recite the passages in the Torah because it says Asher nishba Hashem lavotenu latet lanu. His forefathers were not Jews, so ostensibly a convert should not be able to say this. In the end, of course, the Rambam decided that converts should say this because they are all children of Abraham, of Avraham Avinu, and they can say this as well as others. But the whole issue arose because it's so important to recite precisely, word for word, exactly what the Torah has there. It has to be in Lashon HaKodesh. Tzipor Yetziat Mitzrayim can really be in any language, and of course, if you're comfortable speaking some other language and would get a better way to express yourself or to understand, speaking English or Arabic or French or Amharic, then that's what you talk about at the Seder table, and this is what happens Lamaisa in most Jewish families. Whereas the Bikurim has to be Lashon HaKodesh, even if you don't know Hebrew, you have to recite it. And then again, there were the halachic issues where they decided that everyone would simply have they would repeat after someone who recited it, so as not to embarrass those who don't know Hebrew. Why is it so important for the Bikurim to recite the biblical text precisely word for word as it's written in the Torah? The answer is, I think, because the central point, the theme of Bikurim is Eretz Yisrael. In Haggadah Shel Pesach, it's national liberation, and therefore even we go beyond Yetziat Mitzrayim, and we say Bechol Dor V'Dor Kamim Len L'Chalotenu. And as we know now, as we retro into the 1930s, and it's now legitimate to attack Jews and kill Jews and discriminate against Jews, and it's all politically correct and perfectly acceptable to the powers that be at CNN or in the State Department. So this becomes part of our Haggadah, but the Bikurim ends with our getting Eretz Yisrael because it's about that. It's about our inalienable, undeniable, indisputable divine right to Eretz Yisrael. And that's why we have to say exactly what it's written there, because that's how we instill this narrative in ourselves. Narratives are a form of defining and reinforcing national identity. This doesn't mean that they're propaganda. It doesn't mean, on the other hand, that one can't judge and say that some narratives are truer than others. Some narratives are true, period. Some narratives are false, period. And with regard to Eretz Yisrael, any narrative that doesn't recognize the right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel as their homeland is false, and that's all there is to say about it. And that is why the people who bring Bikurim experientially say Kifarti el Haaretz. The experience of the Haggadah, as you know, is La'arot et atzmo kilu yetziat Mitzrayim. We have to sort of feel or reenact or perform the liberation from Egypt, whereas the experience of the Bikurim is that we came to Eretz Yisrael, whether we came and we ourselves came, whether it's our grandparents or great-grandparents. It's the experience of having received Eretz Yisrael. So now, as we, the Jewish people, have had to defend our homeland, physically defend the land against some of the most violent and brutal and great empires the world has seen: the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Macedonians, Hellenized Greeks, the Romans, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Mamluks, the Turks, the English, and now others up to and including the European Union. we also have to defend our narrative, because that's also being attacked. There are nefarious people who are in positions of power who are force-feeding American students lies about the Jews being just a bunch of colonialists and settlers with absolutely no intrinsic rights to the land, and some other people supposedly have a long history here, and it's their land, and we know this is not true, and we have to reinforce ourselves with our own received tradition, and I would not hesitate to say true tradition. This is the land Asher Nishba Adonai Lavotenu Latet Lanu. Shabbat Shalom, and have a good year.